This penchant for elevating ordinary things, and often their subparts as well, with shamelessly clever brand identities threatens to dilute the value of all brands. One reason I decided to write this book was to clarify the relationship between brand behavior, what brands do and why it matters, and brand identity, how the brand looks and feels. Though there are many brands that own beautiful logos and distinctive names, think of the mythological symbolism of the Starbucks logo, or the clever repurposing of the word BlackBerry, to name the famous Research in Motion (RIM) device, the BlackBerry. There are just as many successful brands that use logos that are little more than a word mark, Facebook, or that are identified by names that are blandly descriptive, General Electric. Believing that the aesthetics are the substance of a brand is as much a mistake as assuming that a penguin can fly, simply because it has wings. When he was 12 years old, my son Lucas was struck by an entrepreneurial impulse. He decided to launch his own photography studio and asked me if I would buy him a copy of Adobe Photoshop so he could create his brand. This anecdote proves that the apple does not, in fact, fall far from the tree. My first instinct was to grab my chest and rail about the price of Photoshop, then a $700 piece of software. But I decided instead to seize the opportunity to learn what he thought a brand was. "Dad, you know what a brand is. That's what you do." "Oblige me." "You know, it's a cool logo and stuff." Intrigued by my son's interest in my profession and nauseated from having it reduced to stuff, I asked him to tell me more about the business concept behind his brand. How was he going to service his clients? What kind of value would he provide? This conjured some eye-rolling because in his mind it was painfully obvious. People would want to hire him because he'd post really great flyers around the neighborhood. He'd use his brand to make them look good so that customers would be inspired to call him. And when they learned that he charged only $25 for a photo, the price would win them over. All he needed was a great logo, he said. That's why he needed Photoshop. "Why do you think people would be willing to pay you $25 for a photo?" "Because it's cheaper than going to one of the professional studios," he said. "But if I'm a potential customer, how do I know that the photo you take for me will be worth $25 or more? How can I trust that you know what you're doing?" More eye-rolling. "Because I'll have a good brand." While I found Luke's circular logic amusing, I was set on using it as an opportunity to educate him about how business actually works and how brands stand for value. I did not provide him with the requested seed money, by the way. I decided that this was a good opportunity to teach him a lesson on venture capital. But in that conversation, my smart kid raised some illuminating questions. For instance, he asked why I spent so much money to buy the first model of the iPhone when I knew it had inferior battery life, poor reception in our home, and no compatibility with my office email system. Wasn't that proof that I was just buying a brand instead of value? Why did I sometimes select a bottle of wine that I had never tasted before simply because I liked the name or the design of the bottle's label? Wasn't that proof that names and logos mattered? Luke reasoned that I made an awful lot of decisions based solely on how much I liked a brand's aesthetics, or not. He surmised that a lot of consumer behavior is irrational and unpredictable, driven mostly by reaction to creative presentation, not substance. Brand contamination. If Luke had observed Congress's lengthy debate over what to rename the legislation formerly known as No Child Left Behind, NCLB, or the social media frenzy that ensued after retailer Gap changed its logo, he would have valid proof points for his observations. When Representative George Miller, Democrat, California, suggested in a 2007 interview that NCLB might be the most negative brand in America, he caught my attention. Though it's not unusual for lawmakers to point fingers at brands, there wasn't a household name sitting in the congressional hot seat. It was No Child Left Behind, NCLB, legislation that had enacted standards-based education reform in 2001. As chairman of the House Education Committee and one of his party's leaders, Miller had a dilemma on his hands. Every Democratic colleague making a run for the White House had pilloried NCLB in stump speeches, decrying it as a clear indictment of President George W. Bush.